All right, well, we're going to get started. We are here today to share with you something that we developed at Pages and Platforms called the Happily Ever Author Framework. So this comes from working with hundreds and hundreds of writers. We've taught thousands of writers through our webinars and through our summit, etc. We've worked directly in our club and with client work, etc., with hundreds of writers. And we wanted to help writers think about things holistically. And so we came up with what we call the Happily Ever Author Framework. So how do you create a writing life, a creative life, where you are quote unquote happy, whatever that means for you most of the time? So we are distilling a lot of learning for you. If you don't know who I am Sue Campbell. I am a mindset coach for writers, disguised as a book marketing coach. I don't honestly care that much about marketing in its own right. I care about what marketing can do for you, and it gives you the impact that you want to have in the world, that you're meant to have in the world. I've worked with award-winning authors, best-selling authors, fiction, nonfiction, traditionally published, independently published. I just love working with writers. This is interactive if you want it to be. So if you are an office supply hoarder, as I am, you might want to grab some pens and some markers. So if you have a red, green, and yellow marker, fantastic. Grab those. Otherwise, just grab a pen or pencil and a piece of paper. And if you have questions throughout this webinar, there's a Q&A box where you can enter your questions, if I set this up right. And then the chat is for what we're doing right now, just chatting back and forth. But if there's something you want me to answer, it's going to get really buried in that chat. So I want you to put that in the Q&A box. Hold on one second. Let me grab this link and put it in the chat. If you want to download a copy of this framework, you can go to that link and download, so you will have a copy of this for yourself. And someone just confirm in the chat for me that that link works for that download. That would be fantastic. Oops. Great. Thank you, Laura. And then, of course, I lost my own way in my own slide deck. Let me go back a few slides and reshare. Here we go. Okay, so someone else is not sure what you're referring to. I just dropped a link in the chat, about 2 up from where you are, Susan. If you click on that link, you should see the framework that we're going to go over today. But I'm going to be walking you through it. So you can save that for later if you want, or you can grab it now. So the framework really answers the question, or helps you answer the question, what do you want out of this writer's life? But tell me right now, when you think about why you write, why you're investing this time, this energy, maybe this money, what do you want out of your writer's life? Why are you doing this? Tell me in the chat. Very open-ended question, I know, but that gets the best answers. Cindy says consistency. So you want to be able to consistently show up and do your writing is how I'm interpreting that. Tell me where I'm wrong. Joy says to share the stories in my head to make people feel joy. Yes. Pepper says to share my family history with my children and grandchildren. Beautiful. Clyde says confession, egotism. That's perfectly fine. I love it. Sometimes egotism is like, it means like that's really what you're meant to show up and do in the world if your ego is absolutely insisting on it. Wendy says a decent income, bonus if bestseller. Love it. Kathleen hopes to publish one day. Stokes says I write because I want to be a professional writer. Ida says long-term money to support charities and to have influence through my writing for the good. Love it. Very needed right now. Olivia says she's doing it out of spite. Her husband says I can't. And Jaden says it's compulsion. Yeah, very common for us writers. Karen says therapy and hope. Elizabeth says to spread meaningful stories and information, to add even just 0.0001% more to the public imagination. Bonnie says it's a bucket list thing for me. Great. And Laura says, I do my best thinking through writing. Yeah, me too, Laura. Donna says, I love to write because I love to write, but now I want to learn to polish so that I can publish. I love that. That's practically in like a poetic pentameter or rhythm, right? My word for poetry, my poetry words are escaping me. Paula says, I feel my work can give people hope. And Sylvia, I want to share my story. These are all beautiful, beautiful reasons. Then the question is, how do we get it? Because we all have an inner saboteur, right? We all have these ways of self-sabotaging where we'll get on track for a little while and we'll get off track and we'll get on track and we'll get off track. So how do we get it? And that is where I think this framework can come into play. So I want to walk you through this framework today. And you can play along. I'm going to show you the framework, and then we're going to do an evaluation. You can do a little self-assessment and see where you are in each of these areas of the framework. So this is what I mean by interactive. So at the top of this framework, very, very important to me, this is the most crucial element, because if you don't have a regular practice, if you don't have a way to get your work out into the world, it's because you are missing this piece. And that is the story that you tell yourself. This is about mindset. Do you even believe it's possible to get what you want out of your writing life? And then how are you empowering yourself to keep working toward it? That comes from the story that you tell yourself. I'm sure you have heard, drop a 1 in the chat if you have heard time and time again, well, if you're a writer, you just have to be persistent. How many times have you heard that? Drop a 1 in the chat if you've heard persistence is key to being a writer. Persist, persist, persist. Great. Has anyone ever told you how to persist on a practical way? Drop a 2 in the chat if no one has told you how to persist. If you're just kind of muddling through trying to figure out how to persist, right? A couple of people. So the way that you persist is through the story that you tell yourself. The story that you tell yourself provides emotional fuel that drives your actions. So if you want to keep taking actions consistent with writing and putting things out into the world and what you say you want, you have to tell yourself a story that gives you the emotional fuel to do that, so you'll take the actions. Okay? Yes, exactly. Elizabeth says, I read the techniques and then I can't stick to them. That is because technique is an action. And if we don't have emotional fuel to take that action, we won't do it. We can't do it for any length of time. This is why I can hand you a checklist of everything you need to do to write your book, or especially to market your book. But a lot of us have this inner saboteur who's very active, who's driving the storytelling and creating negative emotions that cause us to not write and not market, and instead binge Netflix or whatever it is that we do when we want to distract ourselves, right? So the story you tell yourself is absolutely key. So this is how it breaks down. You want to, first and foremost, be able to confess and own your own dreams. So sometimes our culture really wants you to downplay and soft pedal what you want out of life. And a lot of times, because we've maybe set big dreams and then we haven't reached them, we don't want to admit that we want big things in our life because we'll feel bad if we don't get them. But those kinds of dreams are actually emotional fuel. So at least admitting to yourself what you really want and allowing that might even grow over time as you get more comfortable with the concept, that's really part 1 of the story that you tell yourself. We have to know what we want in order to find the story that can get us there. So confessing and owning your own dreams. Now we can look at the stories we are already telling ourselves that are sabotaging that are creating obstacles to what it is we say we want. So harmful stories like, I'm not talented enough. Nobody cares what I have to say. I'm too old. I'm too young, right? Any of those, Donna says, my inner gremlin is cruel and persistently destructive, right? So that's your inner saboteur. Your inner gremlin is the one who's in charge of your storytelling if that's going on. And you have to learn to spot those harmful stories so that you can start to loosen the grip, right? They're never going to go away completely. Your brain and your inner saboteur is going to keep inventing them and serving them to you. But you get to decide if you buy into them, if you cling to them, if you believe them, if you live based on those stories. But we have to know they're happening, because a lot of times it just sounds like the facts. No, this is just me being realistic. No, it's not. It's your inner saboteur being an asshole to you. So we've got to learn to spot those harmful stories, right? Pepper's like, my prose is not good enough. That's a perfect example of a harmful story. And when you think your prose is not good enough, Pepper, how do you feel? Tell me real quick if you can. When you think my prose is not good enough, what's the emotion that you feel? Terrible. And when you feel terrible, what do? My guess is you don't sit down to write more prose, right? You're probably doing something to bury the feeling of being terrible, right? Ida says the research is overwhelming. That's a harmful story. Your inner saboteur, if your inner saboteur can get you to feel overwhelmed, fantastic, because overwhelm is paralyzing. Your inner saboteur's job is to shut your creativity down, to shut the project down, because it wants to keep you safe. So if you listen to that, you're going to get shut down. But if you can start to spot it and say, oh, the research is overwhelming. When I'm overwhelmed, I don't do anything. That's probably a harmful story. How else can I look at this? And that's the next piece. We have to commit to telling ourselves helpful stories. A story that is going to give us emotional fuel to do the work that needs to be done, to sit down and do the writing, to sit down and do the marketing, have the impact that we want, connect with readers, all of that stuff needs an empowering story to tell yourself. And I guarantee if you look back at those periods in your life when you've been on fire, right? When you've been on like a creative roll and a hot streak, think about what you were telling yourself at the time. Maybe it was, this is so fun. This is what I'm meant to do. Why do I ever not do this? This is fantastic. This fills me up. I can share this with people. Those are the kinds of helpful stories that I'm talking about, right? So the story that you tell yourself is the path for everything else that happens in your author life. So if you have shut yourself down in the past, you can trace it back to a harmful story you were telling yourself and your inability to spot it and then pivot to a more helpful story. Is that making sense? Drop a 1 in the chat if that is making sense for you. Beautiful. Okay. Second part of the framework, which is probably more in line with what you came for, but I'm telling you, the mindset stuff underpins it all. This is the story that you write. So if we're going to have a happy life as an author, however we're defining happy, we have to be telling ourselves a helpful story, empowering story, and we have to be doing writing, right? So the story that you write breaks down into these components. You've got to have somewhere to start. You've got to have a first draft, rough draft, or we call it at Pages and Platforms a zero draft. So this is, I'm just brain dumping everything that I think about this story into a first draft. Whether you have a rough outline or whether you're just pantsing, it doesn't matter. You have to have a draft to start with. So that is step 1. We've got to have a zero draft. Once we have something, then we can start to identify what we call story types and the spine of your story, the structure of your story. And at Pages and Platforms, we have 7 different story types, right? These are fundamental archetypal Western storytelling story types. And they fall into external and internal categories. We do a lot of webinars, and Rochelle and Ann teach about this a lot, so I don't have time to go into them today, but we figure out, is this a love story? Is this an action story? Is this a crime story? Is this a worldview story, right? What kind of story am I trying to tell here? Because the reader has expectations of certain kinds of stories, and it will help me write the book because I'll know what to include and what to leave out from my first draft. And it will help the reader have a compelling experience, a satisfying experience, and get the emotional resonance from the story. So once we have a zero draft, we figure out, all right, what is the fundamental story I'm trying to tell here? And usually you have two story types, right? Primary and a secondary. And then the spine, the structure of your story. We use a 4-act structure at Pages and Platforms. So you have to figure out what that is. And then you can go forth into revisions. Some of you, because you've probably been following us for a while, you know what your story types is. Like story types are, Ellen is saying mine is love and worldview. That's a great combination. It's a wonderful combination. Then you have admittedly a very broad part of the framework, but you have the revising, the polishing, and the publishing, right? So the story that you write, you've got to revise it a number of times. That's going to vary for everybody. It's got to get polished up and it's got to get out into the world. We're agnostic on how you do that. We're not advocates either for traditional publishing or independent publishing. We just want to tell you the pros and cons of each, right? And the expectations that you can have for each. But however your story gets out into the world is totally fine by us. So the story that you write, you got to start somewhere. You got to have that zero draft. Then you've got to identify what story type are you telling? What is the structure of it? And then you have to revise and polish to meet that structure and then get it out into the world. So that is the writing part of the framework. Then the third part of the framework is the story that you share, otherwise known as marketing. So drop a 1 in the chat if you are not a fan of marketing. Yeah, I'm getting some ones, right? Because we have our own stories that we tell ourselves about what it means to market. And those stories are not helpful, right? So we got to go back to the story you tell yourself to empower ourselves to share our story. If we think of marketing more as connection and sharing, does that sound better? Drop a 2 in the chat if that sounds better. Bridget says no. That's fair. A lot of 2s. Okay, so sharing and connection is really what marketing is. You want to connect, find, and share with the people who are the ideal readers for your story, right? That's what we're doing. We're sharing our story. That's the third part of the framework. That starts with discovering your ideal reader. So your ideal reader is the person who, when they get their hands on your book, they're going to lock themselves in the bathroom, hide themselves from their family so that they can finish reading it because it's so compelling for them. It's so meaningful for them. They're going to buy it for their friends. They're going to recommend it to their book club. They're not going to be able to shut up about it. They can't stop thinking about it. That's your ideal reader. And this is not a broad demographic, right? This is not any woman between the ages of 35 and 65. That's not enough information to go on. I want you to know your ideal reader, like you're putting her as a character in your book. You're putting him as a character in your book. You're putting them as a character in your book. You want to know their mindset. You want to know the stories they're telling themselves. You want to know what their other favorite books are. You want to know all of this about them because that's going to help you make every other decision that you need to make in order to share your story in a meaningful way. I've got whole other teachings on that, on discovering your ideal reader. If you follow the newsletter, I drop links in there from time to time for more information on that. But even if you just did a little exercise for yourself where I am going to write down as if this were a character in a book, who's the person who would love this story? Give them a name, give them a job, give them a family, give them a library, what's on their bookshelves. So you need to discover who your ideal reader is. And then we can do the nuts and bolts things of actually building a platform. So a platform is simply the way that you're going to communicate to your readers. So that includes your website. Maybe it includes social media. Maybe it includes being a speaker or going to conventions. Maybe it includes a podcast, right? It can be any number of avenues that you can build your platform, but this is the nuts and bolts. I want all of you, if you're going to write more than one book in your life, and maybe even if you're only going to write one book, but certainly if you have more than one book in you, I want you to have an email list of subscribers. So you're creating an author newsletter. People are subscribing to hear from you on an ongoing basis. That is your number one way to share and to have what is called owned, right? You own that asset rather than social media where you don't own your following. You don't run the algorithm. You have no control over who sees your stuff and who doesn't. When you have an email list of subscribers, you have a much more direct connection to your readership, and you have a chance to sell your book to them multiple times. They can see your backlist. They know when you're going to launch a new book. That is your number one communication tool for you to reach your ideal reader, right? So you're going to build your platform in the second section of the framework, where you have got your website, you've got your email list set up, and then whatever else you think you're going to do. And it should be based on where your ideal reader is, right? If your ideal reader is always on Facebook and never on TikTok, you shouldn't be on TikTok. So think about that. That's what I mean by your ideal reader will help you make all of these other decisions about your platform and your marketing and your messaging and your covers and everything. You're going to run it through that filter of, would my ideal reader like this? Wendy says, how can they know when I launch a new book when I don't? That's hilarious. So when you know when your launch date is, you will then communicate that to your reader. Very cute. And then the third piece of the story that you share is you're going to go get your readers. Putting up a website is like having a digital spider web, and you're just waiting for people to stumble into your spider web. Once you know who your ideal reader is, you know where they are in the world, you know where they are online. You can go get in front of audiences someone else has already built that are full of people who are just like your ideal reader. So instead of passively waiting for people to find you or crossing your fingers, you can actually go out into the world where you know they are, introduce yourself, invite them back over to your email list. I can't read everything in the chat right now. So if you have an actual question you need me to answer during the Q&A, drop it into the Q&A for me, and I will get to that question a little later. All right. So here's how these all come together. You see how these boxes, these circles all intersect? So when the story that you tell yourself meets your writing practice, not just this book, but every book, that is how you have commitment to your writing life. By the story you tell yourself and then the writing practice that results from that. That's how you have commitment. I think someone else said consistency, right? How do I get consistency in my writing? It's the story you tell yourself and the writing that you do. When the story that you tell yourself meets the story that you share, right? So when you have the mindset in place that allows you to go out into the world and be vulnerable and risk rejection, you have growth. You have personal growth. This is why I'm a mindset coach and then a secret marketing coach, because marketing is a very effective way to deal with your own shit, right? And to make yourself more powerful, more resilient. That provides growth. And then when the story you write meets the story that you share, that is how you have impact. The writing that you do gets out into the world, into the hands of your ideal reader. That is how you have impact. So when you have that commitment and that growth and that impact, you are now living happily ever after as an author. So that is the framework. And we are going to now go through and do a little self-assessment. So grab your markers, just a pencil and a pen. And we are going to do a little self-assessment. I'm going to walk you through the framework one more time, and you're going to just do stoplights, red, yellow, green. Now, I want to caution you. This exercise is not so you can look at all the red areas and feel bad. You're never going to be at a point where you turn every section of this framework green and it stays green forever. That's just not realistic. What this is it captures the moment that you're at in time right now, so you know where to concentrate, right? You can know, okay, here's what I need to work on. Now I can turn this green. Then it all goes back to red for my next book and we'll start over, right? So don't feel like this is a tool that we're going to use to beat ourselves up. This is a tool you're going to use to figure out where to go next. Okay? Everybody agree to that? Drop a 1 if you agree not to be mean to yourself about this. Fabulous. Okay, here we go. So for each area, you're going to rate yourself red, yellow, green. So the story that you tell yourself, confessing and owning your dreams. If you have a vision board, if you imagine and fantasize about the impact your book is going to have in the world, if you imagine holding your book in your hands, you are a green. If you are more tentative and you're like, yeah, I know I want to get this book out, but you're afraid to commit beyond that, you're a yellow. And if you're like, I'm not even willing to admit that I can finish this book. I don't know where I'm going to be tomorrow. I'm not promising myself I'm going to finish anything. You might be a red, right? This is going to look a little different for everyone, but tell me in the chat, are you red, yellow, or green for your willingness to confess and own the dream that you want for your writing life? Oh, we got a good mix. Greens and yellows. Yellows, yeah. We usually don't see too many reds, like out and out reds for people who are showing up for this and with our clients, because we at least know we're showing up to webinars. We know we want to do some writing. So that's great. I'm seeing lots of yellows and greens. Yep. And because we're writers, we're going to say orange, right? We're going to invent new colors. I love this. Okay. So that's the first criteria. The next part of the framework, and I said most people we see are yellow. I'll tell you kind of where most people who we see fall into so you don't feel alone, right? The next part of the framework is spotting those harmful stories. So if this was completely new news to you, that you are actually telling yourself stories that are interfering with yourself and your ability to get your work done, if the mindset bit that I talked about was completely new to you, you're a red. And that's fine. We're not taught this in our culture. So it's totally normal to be a red. If you're like, I know I'm not always in a mindset, or I don't always have an attitude where I am helping myself, or if I know I have a really vicious inner gremlin, like someone else said, then you're a yellow. And you're a green if you really have a handle on this right now. Like right now, your self-talk is really positive and empowering. Right? There's no positive, negative, but it's empowering. It's moving you forward. Then you're a green. So tell me for this, are you red, yellow, or green? A lot of people we see are actually reds because they don't even realize they're doing this. Okay, we've got red, greens, yellows, lemon, lime, yellow, green, red/green. Yeah, depends on the day, right? Depends on the minute. Okay, fantastic. All right. Then our next piece of the story you tell yourself part is the committing to helpful stories. So again, if this was a new concept to you, you're going to be red because you haven't intentionally thought about cultivating empowering stories for yourself to keep yourself going with your writing and your marketing. So that's red. If you are like leaning sometimes on, I know I can do this, and you're trying to be encouraging to yourself, you're a yellow, but you haven't completely realized all the sabotaging thoughts that are happening. That's yellow. And then you're a green if you have like sticky notes to remind yourself to keep going. If you have encouraging ways that you're talking to yourself all the time. All right, I'm seeing yellows. I'm seeing greenish, mostly green. Yellow, 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 green, red. Fabulous. Fabulous, fabulous. All right. And now that we know this, right, we can lean into this so hard because we already have a storytelling skill set. We know how to tell stories. We just have to tell them in service of ourselves. And most people I talk to for the first time, they're in the red because they don't even realize this is an option. These stories are so unconscious, and we think our thoughts are just the news and our reality that we don't take ownership of them as we do when we sit down to write a manuscript and we know we're telling the story. So don't be worried if you were red, because now you have more information than you had before. Joyce says, actually, yellow, green. I have sticky notes. Fabulous. Okay, so that's the first part of the framework. And then the second part is the story that you're writing. This is the one that really fluctuates from project to project, right? Because you can't, unless you're only going to write one book, you can't turn green and stay green. And it's okay if you're only going to write one book, but most writers I know want more than one. So writing your zero draft, if you don't even have an idea, but you know you want to write a book and you don't have any words down, you're red, obviously. If maybe you have a little bit of an outline, but you don't have any words on the page, you're red. If you've got an outline or if you have a partial draft, you're yellow. And if you've got a beginning, a middle, and an end of your first draft or your zero draft, you are green. So tell me where you are with your zero draft. Yellow, red, green, yellow, green. Yay, a lot of you have zero drafts, green. Someone said, if I've got a first book, but no grand finale. So you're yellow then, I would say. If you've got like most of the manuscript, but you don't have the ending, you're yellow. Smile, laugh, giggle says blue. Red, yellow, green. You are actually, I will tell you, because I know who you are, smile, laugh, giggle, you are definitely yellow. I would say you're even like orange, right? You're getting so close to that green. Okay, fabulous. And then we have people who have multiple manuscripts, right? I saw one that's red on one genre and yellow in another. This is great. Elizabeth says, I write a lot of poems and short stories, but I don't fully edit them or get them published. So purple, that's yellow. I would call that yellow if they're not full. Well, actually, maybe you're green for the zero draft, because that sounds like you've got the first draft. So you're green for that. And then we're going to get into the next section. And that may be where you're a slightly different color. Okay, so a lot of people we talk to are already in the green or they're in the yellow where they've got, most of a zero draft, but not all the way there. Or they have a zero draft. Now they're working on revisions. Identifying your story types and your story spine. So the structural elements, instead of going right to line editing and copy editing on your zero draft, we've got to make sure we have the foundations of a good story. So if you did not know what story types were, when I started explaining this type of the framework, you're red. If you at least knew you were telling an action story or a love story, but you don't quite understand the implications of that, you don't know what it means for your structure, you don't know what it means for your moments that take place in your story, your scenes, your characters, then you would be yellow. You've got some things on it, but not all of them. You're yellow. And then green would be, yes, I know my story types. I know my story spine. I've done a complete revision or maybe even 2 or 3 with that in mind. You would be green. So tell me where you are on your story types and your story spine. Green, yellow, orange, green, yellow. See how there's a mix for all of this? Yellow, green, green, red, yellow, but stuck now to do the final edit. Yellow. Okay. Yeah, James says what my publisher and I want are in conflict. So yellow. Yeah, I would say that seems fair. Christina says light green. Perfect. Yellow, green on one and red on the other. All right, fabulous. Mostly we see yellow here where you've got some sense, but it's not fully nailed down yet. So that's when people are coming to us because they need help with this part, right? I've gotten as far as I can and now I need some help. I need to know what my story type is. I need to know what that means. What are the essential characters, the essential scenes, the essential moments, the stakes, right? What's at stake in the story as a result of this choice of my story type? What's my 4-act structure? Right? All of those things. What's my midpoint shift? What's my first plot point? What's my second plot point? If you don't know any of that, you're either a red or a yellow. And then if you're in the, the copy editing or the proofreading or the line editing, you're past that, you're green. So for revising, polishing, and publishing, again, if you're still in the throes of your zero draft or you're identifying your story types and spine, then you're red for this right now. If you were green in your story types and story spine, then you're going to be, maybe in a yellow because you're in the midst of those finer sandpaper elements. So revision, you're polishing. Or if you're in the process of publishing, you're also in yellow. If it didn't mess up my graphic, I would have at least one more slot in this part of the framework so I could separate out the publishing. So most of who we see are going to be red here because they're not in that stage yet of their manuscript. Most of our audience are in the red on this. And I'm seeing a lot of that reflected in your answers as well. I'm seeing reds, 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 reds. Yeah, totally normal. Every project is going to be in the red at some point for all of these. Okay. Now, for the story that you share, your ideal reader. If you did not know that you could write about your ideal reader as if it was character in a book, you're red for this. If you have some sort of broad demographic, you're like barely yellow for this, right? Or if you just know my reader loves fantasy, you're yellow. You got some idea, but you've really not given it a whole lot of thought, you're yellow. If you have a character sketch of your ideal reader, if you've given him a name, then you are green. If you can answer questions I ask you about your ideal reader and use it to make decisions about your marketing, you're green. I'm seeing a lot of greens. This is making me happy. Most people we see here are yellow, right? They know a little bit. They've got some demographics, but they don't have that really thoughtful look. Jaden says, I finally got a green. Yay. Yellows and greens. Great. I'm not seeing very many reds for this. I don't think I've seen any reds yet. Beautiful. Okay, and then we have building your platform. So remember, this is the technical bits. Do you have a website? Do you have an email list? Do you have social media accounts if you've decided to do that? So if you don't have any of those things, you're red. If you have some of those things, you're yellow. If you have those things, but they haven't been updated in 5 years, you're yellow, right? You're green if you have all those things in place and they're still relevant for you. Most of the people we see here are red. They're missing at least one of those big components. Usually it's the email list. Okay, I'm seeing a lot of reds, yellows, yellow. Okay. Very normal, very normal. I guess I changed my mind at one point and changed that to yellow. So we see some people who have some bits of it, like you have a website, but maybe you don't have the email list. And then finally, the go get your readers. So the actively seeking out your audience, putting yourself out there, we see a lot of reds. So red means that thought is terrifying and you have not done it. Yellow would mean you've maybe done a little something, something. Like maybe you talk to a librarian to try to get your book in the library. I've seen a lot of reds. Totally normal. Yep, somebody says definitely terrifying. A yellow would be, I looked into running ads, or I was on one podcast because someone invited me. That would be yellow. And I would say more like almost orange, right? Or between yellow and red. And then green is, I am actively, consistently, repeatedly getting in front of audiences to tell them about my book. That would be green. I'm not seeing any greens. I might be missing them because it's going very fast. Okay. So lots of reds, lots of yellows. That's normal. And this, again, if you're finding yourself with a lot of reds in this story you share area, you go back up to the top of the framework because the reason you're not doing it is because of a story you're telling yourself about it. Same thing with your manuscript. If you're all red on the story that you write, you're probably telling yourself some disempowering stories that are preventing you from sitting down and doing the work. All right. All right. So tell me, was this helpful? Drop a 1 in the chat if it was helpful. Drop a 2 in the chat if you do not feel helped by this, right? If maybe you're beating yourself up a little bit about it. We don't want that. You guys promised me you wouldn't. Wendy's a 2. I'm sorry, Wendy. Right? We want to use this as a heat map, a roadmap, so we know where to concentrate, not so we put ourselves down. That is a harmful story you're telling yourself. We can honor it, understand that it's there to try to keep us safe, and decide that's not how I want to live my life. I don't want my inner saboteur to be in charge. I want to take control over the story that I'm telling myself so I can have what I say I wanted. At the top of the call, a lot of you told me in the chat what you want for your writing life. The story you tell yourself is going to help you get there because it's going to help you do the writing and do the marketing. So addressing your yellow and your red areas. I have some ideas for you. Ideally, at some point, even if it's just for a brief second, we want to turn everything green. It's not going to stay that way, but how do we turn areas from where they are now to green, at least one at a time? So here are some ideas. The story that you tell yourself. So for the top of the framework, you can read some mindset books, right? Read some mindset books. I really like, I'll just give you one now. You can reach out to me if you want, and I can send you a list of other mindset books that I recommend. Martha Beck, who's a life coach, famous life coach, has a book called Steering by Starlight. So I highly recommend that. I'm also working on a mindset book called The Story You Tell Yourself, specifically for writers. That's probably going to be coming out at the end of this year or the beginning of next year. So be on the lookout for that. If you are really stuck and you don't know how to improve your mindset, really consider some private coaching. Or if you got a lot at stake right now, right? Like you're going to lose this contract if you can't deliver on this book, or you've got an agent who's interested and you can't bring yourself to follow through and finish. Private coaching may be in order to help you get through that. We also have a wonderful program. It's a monthly program called the Happily Ever Author Club. That is somewhere where you can come. I can coach you every single week. I have a Friday call. Anne and Rochelle, our two developmental editors who are brilliant, have a Wednesday call. You can show up live. We will help you clear these obstacles for any of these categories. But if you need the mindset help, it is available inside the Happily Ever Author Club. And you can cancel anytime. You can come in for a month, get yourself tuned up, go out again. For the story that you write, you can join a group sprint. Put your own sprint together. Y'all get on Zoom. You write at the same time every day or every week. You can join the Happily Ever Author Club. We have an amazing program in there all about the story types that I mentioned called Story Path. I cannot tell you what a time saver this information was for me when I was writing my book, because all of a sudden I knew what was missing and what I needed to put in. If you're an overwriter, you will know what you need to take out. You will get through the revision process so much quicker with the guidance of that course and with Anne and Rochelle at your fingertips. You can hire an editor. Make sure you understand the deliverables for that editor and that you're philosophically aligned with that editor, that they have clear things they're going to give you. A lot of people hire editors and spend a bunch of money and they don't get out of it what they thought they were going to get out of it. So proceed with care and thoughtfulness and clarity. The other thing you can do is form a SHEG. This is a model of writing group that we developed called a super hardcore editing group. It is not a bunch of people nitpicking everybody's prose. It's about those underlying story structure, story type concepts, right? A lot of people who come into the Happily Ever Author Club, we teach them how to start a SHEG on their own. They go off and form a SHEG, and then they have a group of people who all speak the same language about how you're approaching your manuscript, and they can keep on going happily with that. For the story that you share, the marketing bit, I have a workbook called the Pages and Platforms Book Marketing Workbook, where you can self-guide yourself through all of the pieces that you need to do to build your platform and build that audience. Again, join the Happily Ever Author Club. This goes for all of this. This is why we designed the club the way we did, because it matches this framework. Join the Happily Ever Author Club. I've got a ton. I'm trying to minimize my swearing in here, but if you come into the club, I definitely do swear. I have a ton of marketing resources, and I am there every Friday on a live call to guide you. We also have a circle community where we're answering questions in between calls. I will do one-on-one book marketing coaching. Even like services plan. If you have a book launching with a publisher and you're like, I need help launching this thing, I do that too. So those are some free ways, paid ways, variety of ways to tackle each of those areas. Remember, you can download a copy of the framework. My link is very buried in here now. Let me see if I can quickly grab it again for you. So you can download the framework. Here we go. I found it. You can print that out. I was actually really pleased when we first came up with this. I heard from a bunch of writers who said they printed it out and they put it up on their wall, right? And they evaluate themselves periodically. They do the little tool and say, all right, where am I red and yellow? And I want to work toward getting to green. Your homework, if you choose to accept it, is to finish your self-assessment. So really, if I know we went through this really quickly, but if you want to look at in more depth all of the areas of the framework, print that out, walk yourself through it. You can watch the replay of this webinar. We're going to send that out later today. I'm going to talk for a couple of minutes about ways to work with us, and then we will have time for questions and answers. So put some questions in the chat if you haven't already about the framework or about where you're stuck. And I want to talk about ways that you can work with us. So the Happily Ever Author Club I mentioned, this is a high touch monthly membership for people who are very serious about their work. I don't care what you want out of it. If you're serious about getting that out of it, this is a community where you can get what you need. We look at this holistically. What's the mindset? What's the manuscript? What's the marketing? What do you need to do to move forward? So we have the Story Path course inside the club. We have live group calls every single week. Every week we have at least 3 calls. Sometimes it is more, often it is more. Anne and Rochelle are developmental editors that will help you figure out how to move your story forward. I am here with a Friday call where I am talking about all things mindset and all things marketing. We have group work sessions once a week led by Rochelle. So if you benefit from that body doubling and getting on Zoom and working at the same time as other people, fantastic. If you go to pagesandplatforms.com and you look at our store, every single masterclass and workshop that you can buy separately on that page is in the Happily Ever Author Club. You get all of that from day one. The only exception to that is the Story Path course dribbles out, because that's like $1,000 course on its own. So we couldn't just give you that boom right away. But you can literally get hundreds and hundreds of dollars worth of stuff your very first month in the club for very little money. So that is available immediately when you sign on. You also get access to a delightful and very serious, I love every single writer in the club, this 24/7 community on Circle of other writers, and access to us in between calls as well through the Circle community. It's $179 a month. You can cancel absolutely anytime, and you can get help with anything that you need. If we don't have the answer, we will help you point to the place where you can get the answer. We almost always, I can think of very few exceptions where we haven't been able to get somebody what they need to take the next step forward. I love running the club. I love the people in it. I love the impact it's having. We've had a writer who ended up winning. She was writing a cozy mystery, and it ended up being a thriller, and she ended up winning. Rochelle, I can't remember the name of the contest. So if you remember, she won a contest that got her a publishing contract with Minotaur. And she directly credited that to what she learned in the club and to the support that she got in the club. We've had people publishing books. We've had people building audiences. We've had people learning how to self-publish, all of these things that they've learned because of the support they got in the club. So if you want to join us in there, I'm going to give you a link. Hold on one second. I'm going to drop 3 links because it's easier for me to do right now. Okay, great. So there's the link to the club. The next thing you could do if you wanted is Goal Getter School for authors. So this is a group coaching program with me where you also get private coaching. So it's a mix of group and private. You're going to set a 3-month focused goal. It can be a writing goal. It can be a marketing goal. We will have, actually our first session already started, so that's already going in June. So the next session where you could join Goal Getter School runs September through the very end of November. We meet 1 week as a group. The next week, you and I meet privately. I'm developing you a customized project plan. This is not a one-size-fits-all. Everybody's going to use my tool just the way it is. You have specific needs. You have a specific life. You have a specific approach. I'm going to help you craft a project plan. Back when I had a real job, I was a project manager and a business systems analyst. I'm going to help you craft a project plan that's going to get you there. And then we're going to meet every single week, either a group call or a private call to get you there. Also, once you join the program, you get quarterly access to me. There's an alumni call every single quarter. So if you get stuck after the program, you can always talk to me once a quarter and get unstuck again. I've had students who have had manuscripts that have been moldering for years finish that next draft in 3 months. I've had people who've created and executed entire book launch plans. I've had people who did like podcast tours for themselves. I've had people who created and completely launched an audiobook during that time. We do all sorts of goals, and I'm so committed to helping you scope that goal correctly, given what you want to accomplish and what your actual life is like. Tons of testimonials on the page. I put the link in the chat, but Claire, I think, is a really good example. She said, I've been struggling to find the motivation and organization needed to revise a messy draft one for almost a year. And with Sue's guidance and support, I managed to complete the full draft number 2 of my first novel in just 3 months. This was a total game changer. The next session starts in September. That's at pagesandplatforms.com/goal getter. The one thing I want you to take away from the framework and from everything we just talked about of options of working on this is that your creative life deserves care and feeding. It needs care and feeding. It cannot be something that is constantly getting pushed to your priority list and still have it come to fruition, right? We can't keep pushing it down and putting it off and letting our inner saboteur tell the story and expect to get the result that we want. So find some way to work on that framework and be moving those areas more towards what you want them to be. With that, we will jump over to questions. I'm going to turn that off. And there's a Q&A box at the bottom. So go ahead and put any questions that you want me to answer in the Q&A box. All right. So Pat says, which is the best resources to use to build an email list? So you need what's called, and Pat, you sounds like you already know this, but I'll say it for everybody. To build an email list, it can't just be your regular Gmail and you're keeping names in a spreadsheet. You can't do that. You need what's called an email service provider that's designed especially to do that and to help you stay in compliance with the way these things need to be done for, the US laws, the European laws, and the Canadian laws. So there are a couple of email service providers that I recommend. One of them is Kit. It formerly was called ConvertKit. Now it's called Kit. So kit.com. Another one that I really like that is very well regarded is called Beehive, Beehiiv, which is annoying, but such as it is. Beehive has a lot of great functionality. The third one is MailerLite, Lite. As a writer, it drives me nuts when we don't spell things the right way, but Kit, Beehive with 2 I's, and MailerLite, Lite. Those are the 3 that I recommend. And if I were starting over again, I would probably use Beehive. I'm on Kit and I like it and I'm not going to move. But if I were starting from scratch, I would probably use Beehive. Great question. Pepper says, how do you start an email list? Oh, this is such a good question. How do you start an email list before your story is finished? I've marketed before by word of mouth, but the story I'm working on is difficult to market by mouth. So when people ask this question, it makes sense to me because our culture is so product focused, right? Like, why would I start marketing something before I have the product to market? But I want you to think about that you have something to contribute. You have things that you can put out into the world to serve your ideal reader right now before your book is ever out. And you have 2 choices. You can launch a book without having any audience to speak of. So it's pub day. I don't have an email list. I don't have an audience. I don't have a social media following, and it's publication day. You absolutely can do that, but you have to keep your expectations realistic that you're not going to sell a lot of books right out of the gate. It's going to take you time to build up your marketing platform. And you're going to have to use your first book to do that and be patient and not get demoralized. So that's one option. Your second option, which I think most people would prefer, is that you are learning how to market ahead of time, getting comfortable with the very idea, building an email list of an audience who's going to be so excited to read your book when it is published, right? They'll be ready and waiting. On pub day, you will have an audience of people that you've managed to build ahead of time. So the way you think about that is you know who that ideal reader is and you know what they need. And so you are serving them from now until when that book is coming out. You're building that relationship. And that is going to look different for all different authors and all of their genres, right? So nonfiction is usually really straightforward, right? I'm writing a nonfiction book of mindset stuff for writers. I've been building my email list for years. I'm going to have an audience of probably 30,000 people that I can launch my book to without having to ask anybody else for anything, right? Without going on a single podcast, that will be my reach. Without running any more ads, I'll just be able to do that to my email list. On the fiction side, I've had authors who are recommending other books. They're doing book reviews that are in line with what they read. I have a client named Naralee Lacey, and she did that ahead of her book launch, where she was basically helping other women find amazing upmarket women's fiction in line with what they wanted to read, right? She's like, I recommend delicious fiction for clever women is her tagline. And so her email list, that's what it does. She serves people who love to read, and they love to read things that she is writing that are in line with that. So that's a fiction example, right? I can't get more in depth than that in the time that we have and still answer more questions. But when you know that ideal reader, you will know how they want to be served. Do they just want to be entertained? Do they need information? What would be helpful for them, right? How do you help them get what they want out of life, even if it's just a really great afternoon of reading? Great question. And it always, always comes up. Anonymous says, oh, how do you decide when a story is harmful versus realistic? I'm thinking about things like true limitations like disability or chronic illness, putting up roadblocks that makes dreams difficult, makes dreams feel impossible. Okay, this is such a great question. And I want you to know I totally get it. So I'm going to give you a non-chronic illness example first, and then we will move into that because I also have chronic issues. When you are telling yourself a story about how you're going to fail, that is also a bullshit story you are inventing. You're predicting the future in a negative way, right? If you're like, I'm going to publish a book and no one's going to read it, you don't know that. You're telling yourself a harmful story that's going to limit because you won't believe anybody's going to read it. So you're not going to take the steps you would need to take to get people to read it. You can also, you'll see authors sometimes saying, I'm writing this book. It is going to be a bestseller. It is going to be a bestseller. Also a bullshit story at this point. We don't know that that's going to happen. We're telling a story about the future that we don't know if it's going to happen. But the person who's saying, I'm going to have a bestseller and is invested in that story is going to take steps to actually do the things it would take to have a bestseller. So the story you tell yourself is what creates possibility and creates willingness for you to take action. I myself have type 1 diabetes. I have Hashimoto's. I have chronically like familial shitty cholesterol. So I have to be on a whole food plant-based diet. I got one more thing. Oh, celiac, right? So I've got this laundry list of things. I'm not saying it's the same as what you have. I'm very lucky in that if my blood sugars are stable and I have a lot of control over that, then I'm not really in pain, right? If I spiral and I don't stay on top of that, I'm miserable. So I want you to know I'm coming from a place where I at least get it a tiny bit, right? I talked to a woman during the Mind Over Manuscript Challenge who she had ADHD and she was recovering from surgery and she had like an autoimmune thing going on. And she had a agent, I think it was 2 agents actually, who had asked for full manuscripts, right? So she like gone to a conference and she gotten 2 agents asking for a complete manuscript. So she needed to go through and do a nice final polish before she sent this off to them. She was telling herself the same thing that's embedded in your question, that my chronic illness is going to put up roadblocks and it feels impossible. She also said, with my ADHD, my deadlines give me superpowers. Like it's game on when I have a deadline. But her illness and her worries about flare-ups were preventing her from setting a deadline. So she wasn't allowing herself to use one of her superpowers because of the illness, right? So it's an on or an off switch almost. And what I helped her to see in that moment, and again, I'm not saying this is exactly your situation, but it'll give you an example, is we can still build a plan that accounts for you having to write with your limitations, but still makes it possible for you to publish and to get it out into the world. It's just not going to look like it would look for someone who doesn't have any chronic health issues, right? So we made her a plan. I'm like, okay, tell me how often flares kind of come up. Okay, how long do they last? Okay, when do you want, if you didn't have any flare-ups, when do you think you could get this manuscript done by, right? And this was back in May, and she said, well, I could get it done by probably mid-July. I'm like, okay, well, let's just put a pin there. We're not going to pick mid-July because you're going to set yourself up for failure. Also, it was stressing her out that she couldn't get this done, which was adding to her flare-ups, right? Because stress adds to flare-ups. So I'm like, okay, in an ideal world, if we didn't have any flare-ups, it would be mid-July. So then we just calculated the average amount of flare-ups that would occur, the frequency and the duration, and we accounted for that. And we said, all right, our adjusted deadline, allowing for things that are going to happen, is going to be mid-August instead of mid-July, right? That gave her some relief. She could still set a deadline. She could still move forward. She knew she could still take care of herself and not try to run herself into the ground. And it created possibility and a way for her to move forward instead of the on-off switch story that we tell ourselves when we have chronic illnesses a lot of the time. I could tell myself a story of it is too much to manage for me to manage my type 1. That's the biggest pain in the ass out of all of them, right? And my kids and my dog, my husband. I could tell myself a story that my plate is too full. I can't run a business. I can't write a book. I can tell myself that story, or I can look for a way to make it all work together. I took a long time in the answer because I think we all have some version of that. And it is very important to me to empower people who otherwise would not be able to get their work out into the world, that you can find a path. You really can, and you deserve to have a path. And it is very, I'm not going to say healing and make it sound like it's all going to go away, but it is a part of your overall health plan and your self-care to make sure your creativity gets a seat at the table and a part of your life. Okay, sorry for that rant. Ruth says, what was the mindset book you mentioned? Steering by Starlight, Steering by Starlight by Martha Beck. Sorry, my voice is going, so I'm getting all worked up. Okay, last question is from Stokes. How do you stay motivated to keep writing and publishing the book you want to write when the books you've already written are not selling a lot of copies? I feel that I'm called to write, but I keep working on my mindset. But how do you stay positive when book sales are not going well and you can't afford to hire a marketing person if this is a weak link for you as an author? Sorry for a long question. No worries. Okay, so the first thing you have to do is get really clear on why you think the other books aren't selling. And take responsibility for what you can take responsibility for, right? So that would be the step one. I would say, what are all my thoughts, right? Do a thought download. What are all my thoughts about the other books not selling and how that's impacting what I'm writing now? Where are the stories in there that are inhibiting me, right? Where are the ones that are blocking my ability to move forward? And then you make conscious decisions. What am I willing to change? Can I draw a line in the sand and say, I'm not going to worry about those other books. I'm just going to clean slate this new book going forward. This is the one I'm going to market. I'm going to start now. Or I want to go back and I want to give those other books a chance. And I want to devote a little bit more time to marketing, right? Right now, you're just allowing yourself, right? You're telling a story that's causing demoralization and you're leaving it at that as if we don't have the ability to change it. and we've got to wiggle that loose. So you've got to be really honest with yourself about what thoughts and stories are creating that right now. And then you can explore some possibilities of how to shift it. Okay. We went a little bit over, but I think it was totally worthwhile. Thank you everyone for being here. Appreciate you doing the work. Really want you to just show up for yourself in whatever way you can. That is my passion and that is my mission. So thanks to everybody and take care and look for the replay later today. Bye-bye.